This is a letter from your lover." The words fell into the cavernous silence of the library like stones into a well. They were not shouted. Alistair Beaumont, the Duke of Blackwood, spoke them with a chilling quiet that was far more terrible than any rage. The air, thick with the scent of old leather and beeswax, seemed to crystallize, freezing Genevieve where she stood. She had been arranging a vase of late-blooming roses on a side table, the deep crimson of the petals a stark contrast to the pale cream of her afternoon dress. Her fingers, which a moment before had been deftly snipping a stray leaf, went numb. The silver shears slipped from her grasp and clattered onto the polished marquetry floor, the sound unnaturally loud. She did not look at the fallen shears. She did not look at the letter he held out, a single sheet of cream stationery pinched between his thumb and forefinger, as if it were something diseased. She looked only at his face, the face she had studied over breakfast tables and across ballroom floors, the face she had traced in the dark, the face that had in recent months become a mask of cool, aristocratic disinterest. Now the mask was gone. In its place was something she had never seen before, a glacial contempt. "I do not understand," she said. Her own voice was a stranger to her, a thin, reedy thing. "Do you not?" Alistair's lip curled. "It seems quite plain. He writes with an impressive passion, one I have apparently failed to inspire. He was a prize bull of a man, bred for generations to be confident, powerful, and unassailable. His title, his lands, his wealth, they were not just possessions, they were extensions of his own skin. To see him like this, his handsome face contorted by a raw, ugly emotion, was like watching a marble statue bleed. The source of that wound, he had decided, was her. The accusation was so monstrous, so utterly untethered from the small, lonely reality of her life, that she could not even begin to form a defense. Her world within Blackwood Manor had become a gilded cage, its bars woven from duty, expectation, and a profound, aching solitude. Alistair was a constant, distant presence, a planet she was forced to orbit but could never touch. The space between them had been filled by his aunt, Lady Beatrice, a woman whose sympathy felt like a silken garrote, tightening with every shared confidence, every whispered piece of advice. "There is no lover," Genevieve managed, her throat tight. "There has never been anyone but you." "Spare me the performance, Genevieve." He tossed the letter onto the vast, leather-topped desk. It landed with a soft flutter, a white wound against the dark wood. "Your protestations are as hollow as the rest of it. The blushing bride, the dutiful duchess. A well-played part, I will grant you that." He began to pace, his polished boots sinking into the priceless Aubusson carpet. He moved with the caged energy of a predator. "I wondered. I confess I did. I wondered at your quietness, your remoteness. I assumed it was maidenly modesty, a delicate constitution. That is what Beatrice called it. She is a delicate thing, Alistair. You must be patient." He laughed, a short, sharp bark devoid of humor. "Delicate. It seems you are anything but." Every word was a blow. He was taking the quiet misery of her existence, the very despair she had confided in his aunt, and twisting it into a weapon against her. She could feel Beatrice's influence in every syllable, the careful poisoning of his mind now bearing its venomous fruit. She felt a strange, cold clarity descend. This was not a misunderstanding to be repaired. This was an execution. He had already pronounced his sentence. The letter was merely the scaffold. "Who gave you this?" she asked, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "Does it matter? It was found. It exists. It confirms everything." He stopped his pacing and stared at her, his blue eyes, usually the color of a placid summer sky, now stormy and dark. "I want you out of my house." The words hung in the air, heavier than the silence that followed. Out of his house. It was not just a turn of phrase, it was an exile. To be cast out of Blackwood Manor, To be sent away by the Duke was to be erased from society. It was a social death from which there was no resurrection. A wave of nausea washed over her, so profound she had to grip the edge of the table to keep from swaying. It was not just the shock, it was the secret she held, a tiny, nascent life tucked away beneath her heart, a secret she had been waiting for the right moment to share, a moment of warmth, of connection, that had never come. The irony was a physical sickness in her gut. He was casting out not just his wife, but his heir. But she would not tell him. Not now. To offer up her child as a defense, as a plea for mercy, felt like a profanation. This child, her child, would not be a bargaining chip. It would be her reason. "Very well," she said. The calm in her own voice was terrifying. It was the calm of the abyss. Alistair looked taken aback. He had expected tears, hysterics, a scene. He had not expected this chilling acquiescence. For a flicker of a second, a crack appeared in his righteous fury. Doubt. But it was quickly sealed over by the mortar of his pride. "Pack your things. A carriage will be arranged to take you to your family's country seat in the morning," he commanded, his tone regaining its ducal authority. "I will have my man of business make the necessary financial arrangements. You will want for nothing, of course, except for my name." She gave a single, sharp nod. She would not go to her family. She would not endure their pity, their questions, their shame. She would not be a broken thing passed from one man's house to another's. She turned and walked out of the library, her back ramrod straight. She did not look back at him. She did not look at the damning letter on his desk. She walked through the grand hall, past the silent, staring portraits of his ancestors, their painted eyes seeming to follow her with cold judgment. She felt their collective weight, the crushing legacy of the Beaumont name, a name she now wore like a shroud. Upstairs, in her lavish suite of rooms, the air was still and smelled of the lavender water her maid had put in the washing basin. It was a room she had never truly felt was hers. It belonged to the Duchess of Blackwood, a role she was now being stripped of. She moved with a slow, deliberate purpose. She did not pack her gowns of silk and velvet. She did not touch the jewel case on her dressing table, its contents winking in the afternoon light. Her eyes fell upon the sapphire earrings, a Beaumont heirloom, the first gift his mother had given her, a symbol of welcome. She picked them up, the stones cold against her skin, then placed them carefully back on the polished surface of the vanity. They belonged to the Duchess. She was not the Duchess anymore. Instead, she pulled a small, sturdy valise from the bottom of her wardrobe. Into it, she folded her plainest traveling dress, a spare chemise, and her woolen stockings. She went to a locked hat box and retrieved a small, painted miniature of Alistair from the early days of their courtship, his face open and smiling. A relic from a different man, a different life. She hesitated, her fingers tracing the smooth ivory, then tucked it into the bag. It was all she had left of the man she thought she had married. Finally, she took the small purse of household money she kept for incidental expenses. It was not a fortune, but it was more than many women would ever hold. It would be enough. She changed into a simple, dark dress, the kind a respectable governess might wear. She looked at herself in the mirror. The pale, haunted woman who stared back was a stranger. Genevieve, Duchess of Blackwood, was gone. In her place was a ghost. As dusk bled across the manicured lawns of the estate, she did not wait for the morning carriage. She slipped down a servant's staircase, her valise in hand, and out a small side door used by the gardeners. The air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of wet earth and coming rain. She did not look back at the looming silhouette of Blackwood Manor, its windows blazing with light like 100 unblinking eyes. She walked down the long, gravel drive, her sensible shoes crunching in the quiet, and out onto the public road. She had no destination in mind, only a direction. Away. The journey was a blur of jolting coaches and dusty coaching inns. She adopted a new name, Mrs. Vance, a widow. It was simple and aroused no suspicion. She traveled west, then south, putting as much distance as she could between herself and the life that had tried to suffocate her. The nausea was a constant companion, a physical reminder of the secret she carried and the reason she had to endure. Days bled into weeks. Her money began to dwindle. The fine fabric of her dress grew travel-stained. The softness of her hands was replaced by a practical roughness. She was learning a new kind of existence, one measured not in social calls and dinner parties, but in miles covered and shillings spent. She ended up in Oakhaven, a small, forgotten village clinging to the rugged coast of Cornwall. It was a place of granite cottages, wind-battered trees, and the constant, rhythmic roar of the sea. It was the end of the world. It was perfect. Her last few coins bought her a room for the night at the Weary Traveler, a modest but clean inn run by a stern-faced widow named Mrs. Gable. The next morning, with nothing left, Genevieve found the woman in the scullery, her arms deep in a tub of soapy water. "I have no more money for the room," Genevieve said, her voice flat with exhaustion, "but I can work." Mrs. Gable looked her up and down, taking in the worn but well-made dress, the elegant posture that even exhaustion could not entirely erase, and the desperation in her eyes. "You're a lady. Your hands haven't seen a day's labor in your life." "Then today will be the first," Genevieve replied. "I can scrub floors. I can do laundry. I can learn." There was something in her tone, a core of unbending will, that made the innkeeper pause. Mrs. Gable looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "The floors are filthy. The laundry is piling up. Start there. We'll see." And so began her new life. She scrubbed the flagstone floors of the common room until her knees were bruised and her back screamed in protest. She washed sheets in scalding water until her hands were red and raw. She learned to chop vegetables, to polish pewter, to serve ale to gruff fishermen and weary travelers. She shed the last vestiges of the Duchess of Blackwood like a snake sheds its skin. The physical hardship was immense, but it was cleansing. The ache in her muscles was real, earned. It was honest. It crowded out the ache in her heart. Months later, in her small attic room, with Mrs. Gable acting as a brusque but capable midwife, she gave birth to a son. She named him Thomas. He was small but healthy, with a tuft of dark hair and eyes the startling blue of a Beaumont sky. He became her world, her reason for every aching muscle. For every dawn she rose to light the kitchen fire. He was the anchor that kept her from being swept away by the sea of her own despair. 5 years passed, 5 years of silence at Blackwood Manor. The great house had become a mausoleum. Alistair moved through its gilded rooms like a ghost, the echo of his own footsteps his only companion. The initial, towering rage had long since crumbled, leaving behind a fine, gray dust of regret that settled on everything. Beatrice had tried to fill the void Genevieve had left. She had redecorated rooms, planned dinners he did not attend, offered opinions he did not solicit. Her triumph had been short-lived. The prize she had won, proximity to the Duke, was hollow. He had walled himself off, and she found herself the mistress of a silent, joyless kingdom. Her presence, once a comfort, became an irritation. Her carefully crafted sympathies began to sound cloying and false. He found himself replaying that final, terrible scene in the library over and over. Genevieve's face, the shock, the chilling calm, the way she had simply said, "Very well." It did not feel like the reaction of a guilty woman. It felt like the reaction of a woman for whom all hope had been extinguished. He started to notice things, the way Beatrice's eyes would flicker away when he asked a direct question about the past, the way she dismissed Genevieve's memory with a little too much venom. He had taken the forged letter from the desk that day and locked it away. One bleak winter afternoon, he took it out. He studied the handwriting, the phrasing. It was passionate, yes, but also stilted, theatrical. It felt wrong. The seed of doubt, once planted, began to grow, its roots cracking the foundations of his certainty. After 2 years of this corrosive emptiness, he did something he should have done at the very beginning. He acted. He sent a discreet message to London and hired a man named Finch, an inquiry agent with a reputation for absolute discretion and relentless tenacity. His instructions were simple: find the truth and find Genevieve. The search was long and arduous. Finch was methodical. He started with Genevieve's family, who were bewildered and hurt, having had no word from her since she was sent to the continent for her health, the lie Alistair had concocted to avoid a scandal. Finch followed trails that went cold, interviewed servants who knew nothing, and chased down rumors that led nowhere. The break came almost 5 years after Genevieve had walked out of Blackwood Manor. Finch tracked down a retired forger living in a squalid part of London. The old man, coaxed by a significant sum of money, recalled a commission from years ago. A haughty woman, dressed in mourning black, who had paid handsomely for a letter to be penned in a passable imitation of a gentleman's hand. He did not know her name, but he described her perfectly. Beatrice. The confirmation landed on Alistair, not with the heat of fury, but with the icy cold of absolute certainty. He had been a fool, a proud, arrogant, blind fool. He had allowed his pride to be manipulated, and in doing so, he had destroyed the one good, pure thing in his life. Finch's work did not stop there. He had also been searching for a Mrs. Vance. The trail was faint, a ghost moving through coaching inns and disappearing. But Finch was persistent. He finally found her name on the passenger list of a coach bound for the far southwest, a woman traveling alone who fit the Duchess's description. He followed the path, village by village, until he came to Oakhaven. A quiet inquiry with the local vicar confirmed it. A Mrs. Vance had been living at the Weary Traveller for nearly 5 years. Alistair set out at once. He rode for 2 days, pushing his horse to its limit, the name of the village a desperate prayer on his lips. Oakhaven. He arrived as the sun was setting, casting long shadows over the granite cottages. The Weary Traveller was easy to find, a sturdy building with a plume of smoke rising from its chimney. He dismounted, his legs stiff, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. What would he say? What could he possibly say? He pushed open the heavy oak door. The common room was warm and smelled of roasting meat, wood smoke, and ale. A few local men sat at a table, their voices a low murmur. Behind the bar, a formidable-looking woman was wiping down the counter, Mrs. Gable. And then he saw her. She was by the hearth, coaxing the fire with a poker. She was thinner than he remembered, and the fine, soft lines of her face had been sharpened by weariness and time. Her hair was pulled back in a simple, severe bun, with stray wisps escaping around her temples. Her dress was plain, functional wool. Her hands, as she carefully placed another log on the grate, were not the soft, pale hands of a duchess. They were the hands of a working woman, chapped and capable. He felt as if all the air had been punched from his lungs. It was her, and yet it was not. The fragile, porcelain beauty he had known was gone. In her place was a woman made of something far stronger, granite, like the cliffs outside. She turned, sensing his presence, and her eyes met his. The poker clattered from her hand onto the hearthstones. Her face went entirely pale, a canvas of shock and something else, something that looked like fear. Before either of them could speak, another sound cut through the tense silence. It was a child's voice, clear and bright, coming from a small table in the corner of the room, where a little boy sat in front of a book, a flickering candle illuminating the page. Dominus, Domini, Domino, Dominum, Domino, the boy recited, his brow furrowed in concentration. Alistair went still. The world seemed to slow down, the murmuring voices of the men fading to a distant hum, the crackle of the fire receding. He heard only that small, clear voice, declining a Latin noun in the middle of a Cornish public house. It was so impossibly incongruous, so startling, that it short-circuited every thought in his head. He turned his head slowly, mechanically, toward the sound. He looked at the boy, dark hair, a serious, focused expression, and eyes the color of a summer sky. His eyes, Beaumont eyes. He looked from the boy to Genevieve, whose face was now a mask of pure, crystalline dread. The truth fell upon him, not like a stone, but like an avalanche, burying him in its crushing, undeniable weight. A son. He had a son whose mother scrubbed in floors to pay for his Latin lessons. The carefully constructed walls of his composure, the ducal armor he had worn his entire life, shattered into a million pieces. He took a stumbling step forward, his hand outstretched, not in command, but in a desperate, silent plea. "Genevieve," he breathed. Her expression hardened instantly. The shock and fear were gone, replaced by a fiercely protective wall of ice. She moved swiftly, placing herself between him and the boy at the table, a lioness shielding her cub. "You are not welcome here, Your Grace," she said, her voice low and trembling with a fury that was 5 years in the making. Thomas looked up from his book, his blue eyes wide with curiosity, sensing the sudden, violent shift in the room's atmosphere. He looked at the tall, imposing stranger, then at his mother's rigid back. "Mama?" he asked. "Who is that man?" The simple, innocent question was another blade in Alistair's heart. He could not answer. He could not breathe. He could only stare at the woman he had wronged and the child he had never known, the living, breathing embodiment of his catastrophic failure. "He is no one, Thomas," Genevieve said, her voice tight. She did not take her eyes off Alistair. "A traveler who has lost his way." She turned to Mrs. Gable, who was watching the scene unfold with a grim, knowing expression. "Mrs. Gable, the gentleman is leaving." It was a dismissal, as cold and final as the one he had given her in the library 5 years ago. He deserved it. He deserved every ounce of her hatred. But he could not leave. He would not. "Genevieve, please," he began, his voice rough with unshed tears. I know everything. About Beatrice. The letter. It was all a lie." She gave a short, bitter laugh. "You know? How wonderful for you. And it only took you 5 years to uncover this truth. 5 years while I—" She gestured around the humble common room, at her rough dress, her chapped hands. The words were unnecessary. The truth of her life was written all over her. "Your discovery changes nothing." "It changes everything," he insisted, taking another step forward. She flinched, and he froze, the small movement a physical blow. He had made her afraid of him. "I was a fool, arrogant, blind. I let her poison me. There is not a day, not an hour I have not regretted what I did. I came here to find you, to beg for your forgiveness." "I have no forgiveness to give," she said, her voice as cold as the sea spray outside. "The woman you are looking for, the Duchess you cast aside, she is gone. She does not exist anymore. You are speaking to Mrs. Vance, a widow, and a mother." She reached back, her hand resting on Thomas's shoulder, a gesture of both comfort and possession. "Now, I will ask you one last time to leave my home." Her home. The word twisted in his gut. This rough inn was her home. Blackwood Manor, with its 100 empty rooms, was his prison. He looked past her to the boy, his son. The child was watching him with an unnerving, intelligent gaze. He had Alistair's eyes, but he had his mother's strength in the set of his small jaw. Alistair's heart ached with a pain so profound it was almost sweet. It was the pain of something real, something that mattered more than pride or titles or land. "I will not leave Oakhaven," he said, his voice quiet but firm. It was not a command. It was a statement of fact, A vow. "I will not leave you. Not again." He turned, not waiting for her response, and walked out of the inn, back into the growing dark. He did not get on his horse. He stood in the cobbled street, the damp, salty air filling his lungs, and looked at the light spilling from the windows of the weary traveler. It was the only warmth in his world. He had found her. He had found them. The chasm between them was vast, carved out by 5 years of pain and hardship on her side, and 5 years of hollow regret on his. He knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that he could not command her to cross it. He could not order her forgiveness. He would have to build a bridge, stone by painful stone. The next morning, the village of Oakhaven awoke to a startling piece of gossip. The Duke of Blackwood, one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in England, had taken lodgings in the old fisherman's cottage at the edge of the village, a damp, 2-room hovel with a leaking roof, and a constant view of the gray, churning sea. Alistair ignored the whispers, the stares of the villagers as he bought bread and cheese from the local baker. He was stripped of his ducal authority here. He was just a man with a single, all-consuming purpose. He did not approach the inn again that day. He simply existed within Genevieve's orbit. He saw her shake out rugs in the morning, her movements brisk and efficient. He saw Thomas playing with a wooden boat in a puddle, his laughter carrying on the wind. Each glimpse was a fresh torment, a reminder of the life he had thrown away. He spent the day making his cottage habitable. He paid a local boy to fetch him wood and water. He learned how to light a fire without summoning a footman. The simple acts of survival were a penance. The cold that seeped into his bones from the damp stone walls was a tangible manifestation of his own inner desolation. On the 3rd day, he sent for Mr. Finch. The inquiry agent arrived a week later, not on a fine steed, but in a dusty public coach, looking as unassuming as ever. He brought with him a portfolio of documents, affidavits, the forger's signed confession, proof. Alistair did not take the papers to Genevieve. Instead, he waited. He learned her routine. He knew that every afternoon she would take Thomas down to the small, sheltered beach to search for shells. He found them there, the boy running ahead while Genevieve walked slowly, her head bent against the wind. He approached her carefully, as one would approach a frightened deer. He held no papers, no evidence. He simply stood before her on the wet sand. "I need to speak with you," he said. "We have nothing to speak about," she replied, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Thomas," he said, "he is my son." "He is my son," she corrected him fiercely, her eyes snapping to his. "I carried him. I bore him. I have fed him and clothed him and kept him safe while his father lived in a palace and mourned his own wounded pride." "You are right," he said, his voice raw. He did not flinch from the truth of her words. "I have forfeited any right to him, but he is the heir to the dukedom of Blackwood. He deserves to know who he is." "He knows who he is," she shot back. "He is Thomas Vance, son of a widow who works at an inn. He is happy. He is loved. What can a dukedom give him that is better than that?" "Alistair," he said quietly. She frowned. "What?" "My name. It is Alistair. I would like him to know my name." It was a small request, a tiny crack in the wall of her defenses. She stared at him, her expression unreadable. The wind whipped a strand of hair across her face, and he had to fight the instinct to reach out and brush it away. After a long moment, she gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. He did not press his advantage. He simply nodded in return and walked away, leaving her alone on the beach. He began a new kind of courtship, a courtship of service. He saw that the inn's woodshed was low, and he spent an entire day chopping and stacking wood until his hands, soft and unaccustomed to labor, were blistered and bleeding. Mrs. Gable watched him from the kitchen window, her stern face betraying a flicker of something that might have been respect. Genevieve said nothing, but she used the wood he had chopped to warm the inn. He learned from the baker's wife that Thomas was fascinated by ships. Alistair spent his evenings carving a small, detailed model of a three-masted frigate. He left it on the inn's doorstep one morning before dawn, with no note. Later that day, he saw Thomas sailing it in a rain barrel, his face alight with joy. He brought Mr. Finch to the inn. He did not demand an audience. He sent a message via Mrs. Gable. "Mr. Finch is here. He has information regarding the letter. He will speak with you if you will allow it." To his surprise, she agreed. They met in the inn's private parlor, a small, stuffy room filled with Mrs. Gable's porcelain collection. Thomas was not there. It was just the three of them. Finch, calm and professional, laid out the evidence on the small table. He spoke in a dry, factual tone, recounting his investigation, the discovery of the forger, the description of the woman in black. He presented the forger's confession, his signature witnessed and notarized. Genevieve listened in absolute silence, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She read the confession, her eyes scanning the page. When she looked up, her expression was not one of triumph or vindication. It was one of profound, bone-deep weariness. The truth did not erase the years of hardship. It only illuminated the senselessness of it all. "Beatrice," she whispered. "I have sent her away," Alistair said immediately. "She will not be a part of our lives again. I went back to Blackwood. I confronted her. She is disgraced." He reached into his coat pocket. She had these. He placed the sapphire earrings on the table. They glittered in the dim light, impossibly beautiful and opulent in the humble room. A relic of a buried life. Genevieve looked at them, then back at him. "Do you think a pair of earrings can buy back 5 years?" "No," he said, his voice thick. "Nothing can. I did not bring them as a payment. I brought them because they are yours, because everything I have is yours, and our son's." She did not touch the earrings. She simply stood up. "Thank you for the information, Mr. Finch. Your Grace." She nodded to both of them and left the room. Alistair felt a surge of despair. Even with the truth laid bare, the chasm remained. He had proven his innocence in the matter of the conspiracy, but he had not erased his own guilt. The true crime was not that he had been deceived. It was that he had been so willing to believe the lie, that he had not known his own wife well enough, not trusted her enough, to see the truth that was right in front of him. He stayed. He continued his quiet penance. He spoke to Thomas when he could, not as a duke, but as a man. He answered the boy's endless questions about the world. He told him about London, about the great ships in the harbor, about the deer in the park at Blackwood. He did not call himself the boy's father. He was simply Alistair. The thaw came slowly, imperceptibly, like the turning of the seasons. It began with small things, a nod of acknowledgement when he brought the wood, a brief, shared smile when Thomas said something particularly astute. One evening, as he was leaving the inn after a brief, stilted conversation, she called out to him, "Alistair." He stopped, his heart leaping. It was the first time she had used his name since his arrival. "The roof of your cottage," she said, her arms crossed over her chest. "It leaks. I heard you coughing this morning. You will catch your death of cold." "It is of no consequence," he said. "It is of consequence to your son," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "He is growing fond of you. It would be a cruel thing to let him grow fond of you, only for you to die of a foolish, preventable chill." It was not a declaration of love. It was not forgiveness. But it was something. It was a crack of light in the darkness. The next day, Mrs. Gable informed him that his things had been moved from the cottage to one of the inn's empty guest rooms. "The Duchess's orders," the woman said, with a hint of a smile. He did not argue. He began to take his meals in the inn's kitchen, with Genevieve and Thomas. They were quiet, awkward affairs at first, but slowly, a new kind of domesticity began to take root. Thomas would chatter about his day, and Alistair would listen, mesmerized. Genevieve would speak of the running of the inn, and he would ask questions, learning about the life she had built for herself. He discovered the miniature portrait one afternoon. He had gone to her room to return a book she had lent him, and he saw it on her small nightstand, where she must have taken it out. The smiling, carefree young man in the painting was a ghost to him now. He picked it up, his thumb stroking the smooth surface. She entered the room behind him, and he turned, the portrait still in his hand. He expected anger, an accusation of snooping. Instead, her eyes were soft with a sorrow that mirrored his own. "You kept this," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Sometimes," she said. "He was the only person I had to talk to." In that moment, the last of the ice around his heart melted away. He saw not the hardened survivor, but the lonely, frightened girl she must have been, clinging to the memory of a love she had thought was real. He stepped forward, and for the first time in 5 years, he reached for her. He did not try to kiss her. He simply took her hand, the one that was calloused and rough from work, and held it in his own. It was a small gesture, but it was everything. She did not pull away. Her fingers curled, tentatively, around his. "I love that man," she said quietly, looking at the portrait. "I do not know if he still exists." "He wants to," Alistair said, his voice thick with emotion. "He's trying to find his way back." They returned to Blackwood Manor not as a duke and his reclaimed duchess, but as partners. The decision was made together in the small kitchen of the weary traveler over a cup of tea. They would go back, for Thomas's sake, for their own. But things would be different. Before they left, Alistair, with Genevieve's input, established a trust. Its purpose was to build a proper school in Oakhaven, so that no child would have to learn their Latin from a single, tattered book by candlelight. It was a gift to the village that had been her sanctuary. Mrs. Gable was named as one of the trustees, her stern face breaking into a rare, genuine smile when Alistair told her. The return to Blackwood was strange. The great house was the same, but they were not. The oppressive silence was gone. It was filled now with the sound of a child's laughter, echoing in the long corridors. Thomas, the new Marquis of Ashworth, explored his new home with a boundless, fearless curiosity. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. Genevieve was no longer the timid, uncertain bride. She was the mistress of her own life, a woman who had survived and thrived on her own terms. She moved through the grand rooms with a quiet confidence that Alistair found breathtaking. She was his equal, in every sense of the word. One evening, weeks after their return, he found her in the library, the room where it had all fallen apart. A fire was burning in the grate, chasing away the chill and the ghosts. She was not arranging flowers. She was sitting in one of the large leather armchairs, reading a book, a cup of tea steaming on the table beside her. Thomas was curled up on the rug by the fire, fast asleep, his head resting on the back of a patient, old wolfhound. Alistair came and knelt by her chair. He took her hand. She looked up from her book, a question in her eyes. "I love you, Genevieve," he said. The words were not grand or ducal. They were simple, stripped bare, and utterly true. "I was a fool, and I am so sorry. For all of it." She looked at him, truly looked at him for a long moment. She saw the man from the portrait, the man from the beach, the man who had chopped wood until his hands bled. She saw the father of her child. She brought his hand to her lips and pressed a soft kiss to his knuckles. "I know, Alistair," she said, her voice soft. "Welcome home." He rested his head in her lap, and she stroked his hair. The fire crackled. The dog sighed in its sleep. The great house was finally, truly at peace. It was no longer a cage or a prison. It was a home,